In this tutorial, I'll show you how to make a falling gelatin cube in Maya. So I'm going to click New Scene, and then it has created a scene, but I'm going to make sure that this is saved in the right place. So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to choose Set Project. This is one of the more critical things that you need to do when setting up a project for Maya. And I'm going to navigate to the folder where I've been saving projects, double-click that, and in here I'm going to right-click and choose a new folder because I'm going to create one for gelatin. Double-click that, and then I'm going to click Set. So I'm setting it there, and then it asks me if I want to create a default workspace there, and I say yes. Next thing I want to do is go ahead and save this scene. So I'm going to choose Save Scene As, and this is where it is going, and I'm going to call this Gelatin Scene 1. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and create a plane. I click that, I created a plane. I'm going to hit the R on the keyboard and scale that up by selecting the middle of it and scaling it up. So that is created. Next thing I'm going to do is create a cube. So I'm going to create that, and it creates a polycube. I'm going to take that cube and I'm going to move it up, and I'm also going to scale it up. So to move it, I hit the W on the keyboard, and then I can move it up like that. Hit R on the keyboard, scale it up, and then I'm going to make some other changes to it. I do want to have some subdivisions to this. I have my construction history on, so I can come over here and then make changes to that under here where it says Polycube 1. And I can start with maybe 3 subdivisions and 3 and 3. Length, the width, height, and depth. Now I'm ready to make this into a soft body known as an nCloth. So if I were in modeling, I'm going to make sure that I switch over to FX. And then if in FX, I'm going to go over here to the thing that says nCloth, because my menus changed. So when I'm in modeling, my menus are one thing, and then I'm in FX, it changes to another one. So I'm going to choose nCloth, and I'm going to tell it to make this cube into an nCloth. Now if I hit play over here, you'll notice that it falls, and it keeps falling. It falls right through that plane because I have not told this to interact with the cube. So I'm going to go ahead and select my plane, and then I'm going to go to my nCloth menu and tell it to create a passive collider. So now these will interact with each other. If I hit play, then you'll notice that it hits and then kind of bounces a little bit and jiggles around. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this, hit E on the keyboard to get my rotate tool, and then see how that looks. So you notice it bounces around a little bit and then jiggles some. Now if I wanted it to jiggle more and be a little bit wigglier, then I want more subdivisions. So I can come over here in my attribute editor, and I'm going to tell it to give me a few more subdivisions. So if I go to Polycube 1, and let's say I make this 5, 5, and 5, and then let's take a look at how that changes. So now you'll notice that it is a bit wigglier. The more subdivisions you add, the more it will perhaps even collapse on itself. However, if you scale it up, then it will add rigidity to it. So that's fine for right now. So I just jumped to the beginning of time here, and I'm ready to make more changes. Next thing I want to do is go ahead and do some shading to this. So to do shading, I'm going to go to my hyper shader, and then I'm going to create the textures for this. Now I'm going to be rendering later in the Arnold renderer, so I'm going to choose, under my shader, I'm going to choose the surface, Arnold shader surface, AI standard surface as my starting point. Next thing I want to do is go ahead and name this, so I'll call this red gelatin. Now it hasn't turned red yet because I haven't changed that color. If I click color, then I can choose a red and then maybe make some changes to that. And that is that surface color. And You'll notice, though, it looks like it's kind of just painted. So I'm going to make some changes here. Also, it is a bit rough. So I'm going to give it a little bit less roughness, so now it looks a bit shinier. And then I'm going to collapse the specular, and I have my base color here. Next thing I need to do is make it somewhat transparent, so it needs some transmission. So I expand transmission, and then I can increase the weight of the transmission. Though when I increase that, you'll notice that it still has this white transparent look. That's because the color for my transmission is this grayish white. So I'm going to move up a little bit like that so I can see both my base and my color for my transmission. And I click that, and I'm going to get my eyedropper tool and select that. Now it's the same color. Make it lighter or darker. And that is kind of the basics to it. You can increase its transmission by increasing the weight. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this in a moment, but I need to apply it to my gelatin cube over here. So I'm going to click middle mouse button and drag it to this, and now it is shaded it. Though what I don't like is I don't like how it is very rigid looking. So I'm going to make some changes to this, and I'm going to give it a smooth shade. So I have this cube selected, and then over here, I'm going to look for the output cloth 1. Output cloth 1, and I'm going to choose smooth mesh and smooth mesh preview. So you do need to apply this to the cloth, not to the shape itself. And now it is a smooth mesh preview. So if I select off here, now you can take a look at that, and it is rounder. And then it interacts with that surface. So if I wanted to add another one of these cubes, I'm going to go ahead and do a Command D. So it duplicated it, and I'm going to move that over. And maybe I'll scale it down a little bit. Change the rotation. And I'm going to move this above the other one because I want it to interact with it. Now if I hit play, you'll notice that this one falls, but this one does not. Because although I duplicated it, it did not duplicate the nCloth properties. So I'm going to need to make this into an nCloth. So with this one selected, I go to nCloth, and I'm going to choose Create nCloth. Now that is also an nCloth, but you'll notice that Smooth Mesh Preview went away because it does not apply to the nCloth, the Output Cloth 2. So this is this one right here. I click Output Cloth 2 and choose Smooth Mesh Preview, and now that is working as well, and they interact with each other. Now I want to change the color of this one. I'm going to go to the Hyper Shader, and they are both the same color. I want to duplicate this. I'm going to do a Command D. Now I have two of them, Red Gelatin and Red Gelatin 1. I'm going to change this Red Gelatin 1 to Yellow Gelatin. And then I'm going to change that color to yellow. This is my base color. And then I need to change the transmission color as well. And then you can make whatever changes are necessary for your project. And then I want to apply it to the smaller cube. So I'm going to choose this and drag it to that other cube. And now you'll see that it is, I have a red one and a yellow one. And I'm going to go ahead and just change my angle a little bit. And try to find that right camera angle for this. And I'm going to scale up this so that ground plane becomes a horizon. Punch in a little bit. So the story fills the frame, move down. Just find the right place for my shot. And if I don't like the way that is interacting, I can make some changes to it. So I'll stop that simulation, go to the beginning of time. What I can do is maybe I could scale this up a little bit more. I'm going to select this first cube here, scale it up a little bit more. I'm going to take this one, scale it down a little bit. Maybe change the rotation. And then take a look at that. And it kind of just sits inside there. I may or may not want that. And I think I don't want it for this one, so I'm going to take and move that over. You'll find that you make one small change to an object or setting, and it will drastically change that simulation. All right, I think I kind of like the way that kind of skids across. But I don't like how it just kind of flattens out. So I'm going to make some changes to these. So I'm going to select this yellow one, and I'm going to go to my attribute editor, and I'm going to be making sure that I'm working on this polycube 2 and its collision for that. And that's going to be under this nCloth shape 2. That's what's associated with this. So I go to my collisions, and then I can make some changes here. I can change the collide strength, thickness I'll talk about in a moment. Perhaps I can give it a little bit more friction. If I wanted to, I could make it a little sticky, so it would stick to the surface of this. So let's take a look at that. And then it kind of bounces a little bit. It's reacting a little bit differently. So I'll make a few other changes here and take a look at that. And I might like that. Perhaps I want it to have a little bit more resistance or pressure on the inside of that. So then I can come over here under pressure, and I can give it a pressure setting. If I put it in the negative, it's actually going to collapse in on itself. But if I take it to the positive, then it's going to puff out a little bit. So I don't want it to puff out a huge amount, because if I go like this, you'll notice that it inflates. And I don't want it to do that, but I want it to just have a little bit of pressure. And then perhaps that might be the way I want it for this particular project. But I think I want to give it a little bit more pressure. So I'm going to increase that pressure and jump back and take a look at that one more time. So those are those settings. Also keep in mind that scaling this up or down is going to change it. So if I make it smaller, you can see how it changed in how it interacted. Or if I make it larger. Now, if that's the way I want this to kind of go, I'm ready to move on to lighting. And then we'll work a little bit more on camera. So to create my lighting, I'm going to switch just to my modeling one for right now. And then I'm going to go to Arnold, and I'm going to create an area light right here. And then that created my area light here. I'm going to scale it up, and I'm going to move that area light up. Now, the line on this indicates what direction it is pointing. So I'm going to take this, and I want it to point kind of downward at this, maybe a little bit of backlighting. I'm going to move it up a little bit more, and then it is illuminating my set. Now if I switch to my Arnold renderer here, I'm going to turn off the grid. I don't need to see that. But you'll notice I don't really see much. That's because the intensity of this area light is pretty low. So I'm going to take my intensity up and then take a look at that, and not seeing too much right now. But then I can also take and increase my exposure. And now I'm seeing a bit more. So I'm bringing that exposure up, and then I can adjust that intensity either higher or lower. Now you notice that although the slider took me to 10, if I punch in a higher number, then it will reset that slider and give me a little bit more that I can do with that. So I'm going to hit play. Now it's going to look a little bit blocky and slow as it renders that. But that looks pretty good. So I have shaded it, I have lit my set. I just want to mention one other thing, and that is how these collisions work. But I have forgotten to do something. Make sure you often do this, and I'm going to do a Command S on a Mac. If you are on Windows, then you do Control S. I want to make sure this project is saved. I'm going to turn off my Arnold renderer, and I'm going to view it from the side in just a moment. But what I want to do is create my camera. So I'm going to set the camera to this, because I'm going to come back to these other side views in a little while. So to create my camera, I like kind of where my camera is right now, or my perspective, but I want to create a camera. So I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to tell it to create camera from view. Now I have created a camera called Pers1, but I want to call that camera. So I double click the name of it, call it camera. And although I have a camera here, I'm not actually viewing from it. I'm still viewing from this perspective here. So with that selected, I'm going to go to Panels and Perspective, and I'm going to tell it to choose Camera. Now I'm actually viewing from this camera. But I'm going to view from Perspective for right now instead, and I can change my view because I want to actually see it from the front. That's my camera right there. And I'm going to punch in. Just kind of ignore that camera, and I'm going to go to the orthographic view. Now the reason I'm bringing this up, whether from the front or the side, I want to make sure that this cube is colliding with the ground. And I'm going to select my plane, punch out a little bit, and hit play. And I'm going to see, does it actually hit? And then you'll notice that, well, it doesn't. It collides above the surface of this plane. So before I render this out, I want to really make sure that it is interacting properly with my ground plane. So I can select either my cube or my plane, and I might have to do it for both. If I select my cube, and then I come over to my nCloth shape, and then I'm going to go to this section under collisions, and I want to turn on the solver display collision thickness. That's telling me where this collision thickness is for this particular object. And if I hit play, you can see, well, it looks like it's colliding right there. And if I select this plane, then you can see, well, that's where it is. That's the collision thickness of this shape. It actually ends right there. Before I do this cube one, I'm actually going to select the plane, and I'm going to turn that display collision thickness on. And now I can see where that issue is. And again, I am viewing from this orthographic view, so I can get a good view of this. So that's where those two things look like they're colliding. And I'm going to change the thickness of the plane, and then I'm going to change and take a look at that. So I'm going to go back in time and see how does that hit and collide. Now it looks like it's hitting the surface a little bit more, but I want to just double check. So, because I'm viewing the thickness for both the cube and for the plane. So I'm going to go back over to my cube, and I don't want to see that thickness. I'm going to turn that off. And you can see that it's still kind of hovering above that. So I'm going to make a change to that. The one thing, though, to keep in mind is that as this collides, if I'm not careful, I could actually have it go through a surface of an object. So there is a need for that thickness. I'm just going to turn that thickness down. Jump back to the beginning of time for that and see what that looks like. I'm going to turn that collision thickness off, and I'm going to grab my ground plane and double check that. And I'm going to turn that thickness off just so I can preview it. Now I'm going to switch out of the orthographic view and then take a little bit better look at that. And I have my camera, and I'm actually going to view from my camera. And the reason I did that is because sometimes you're going to see something from a certain perspective and it looks fine, but if you rotate your viewpoint, it isn't actually fully interacting. So that's why we did that. Next thing I want to do is save one more time. I can hit play, take a look at that, see how they interact. Now I did only adjust the thickness to this cube. I probably should also view it from the side here and double check that it's actually interacting with that as well. Looks like it's pretty close with that, but I'm going to double check by grabbing this plane, and I'm going to turn that collision thickness. It's pretty close. I could lower that collision thickness, but I want to make sure that it actually still doesn't go through it and it looks a little bit more realistic. So I'm just turning that collision thickness off. That's just a thing to double check. Especially as it takes a long time for it to render, you want to make sure that it is rendering well. Now I'm going to switch my perspective back to my camera and take a look at that one more time. Looks like it's working the way I want it to. And it is lit the way I want it to be lit. Last few steps here. I'm going to turn off that Arnold view and make sure my camera and render settings are correct. So I'm going to hit my render settings right here. And it is critical that you do this. You want to make sure that it is saving in the right place. Because I did my set project, I know it is going to the right place, and it's telling me that it's going to path and it's going to that project folder I created earlier. If you made a mistake, then you could also choose that or change the project image directory, but it is going to the right place because I set it earlier. Next thing I want to do is make sure that I am setting my animation to the right image size. So I'm going to choose this, and I'm just going to be choosing this 1080. And now that is set. But currently it is set to export only a single frame. So under here it says frame animation. It says single frame. If you miss this step, you are only going to render one frame. So I want it to render out the whole thing. So the best one to choose is this name_number extension. But it is only by default exporting 10 frames. So this is supposed to be 240 frames because it is 24 frames per second and I want it 10 seconds long. I'm going to make sure that my end frame is 240. So that is set. It's saved in the right place. It has the right settings. And then I'm going to choose close. Next thing I want to do is really make sure that my camera looks exactly the way I want to for this. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select that camera, and in my attribute editor, I'm going to make sure that I can see where my resolution is on this to make sure nothing is cut off. So I'm going to go to my display options here with the camera selected again. In my attribute editor, I go to display options and I want to choose display resolution. And that's just telling me where my frame kind of begins and ends. So I can actually punch in a little bit more. All right, I think I got it the way I want it. last step is to actually render this, but I'm going to do save. So I've saved it. I can take a look in my Arnold view to kind of take a look at what that looks like. Looks like I'm ready to render. So in order to render this animation, I have already set my animation settings. Last thing I want to do is actually render it. So I'm going to go to the rendering tab right here, and I'm going to find this one that says that this is the batch renderer. You'll find that this one is going to be the best one for you when it comes to rendering out your animations. And I'm going to double check one more setting in here and make sure that I'm rendering the right camera. So here, renderable camera is camera. Sometimes perspective will be selected and you don't want to do that. I want the renderable camera to be camera. And now I'm ready. I'm going to hit this batch render right here. And once I do that, it opens up the batch render tool and then it starts to render. And that is going to take a while. You can notice down here it says result rendering with Arnold renderer. You do want to watch that and make sure that it is actually working. If you have a mistake, then typically it will act like it's rendering and it's just going to stop. But you can see here it is rendering. It's taking a little bit of time, and this is the frame that it is rendering. And then I can double check that. And now it's actually on the second one. So I'm going to double check, minimize that, and I can go to where I have my project saved, Gelatin, and this is where my images are. So it has created the first image right here. Now, you'll notice in my project, I had a black sky, dark sky, but I don't see that here because I am rendering this with an alpha channel. If this is brought into the video editor later, you will not see a dark sky. If there's no background, it will still be a dark, or you won't see a light sky like this. You will see a dark background. But again, that has an alpha channel. So it is going through and it is rendering the different frames. So this is going to take a while. Now I can just double check that it is finished. And I go to my Gelatin folder, and here in that folder I have my images. So it has done 240 images and it is finished rendering. And that is how to render your Maya project.